Hello and welcome. My name is Lisa Gulesserian, and I am an active member of Zoravik. Zoravik, which means in solidarity in Armenian, is a Boston-based activist collective that promotes new avenues for political and grassroots organizing and project-based engagement for progressives. Since Azerbaijan and Turkey first attacked Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, on September 27, 2020, we've been working hard on a few fronts. First, we seek to expose the false equivalency and outright obfuscation pervading media and think tank coverage of this war. In tandem, we seek to provide our followers with accurate and reliable information and analysis of the evolving situation. To that end, we organized a panel, the Karabakh War, History, Context, Implications, and wrote an op-ed, From Hate Speech to Ethnic Cleansing, Why We Need to Get Our Facts Right About Armenia and Azerbaijan, which was translated into 14 languages and cited by Mashinka Firunz Hagopian in the Los Angeles Review of Books. Last week, we began hosting a weekly program called Artsakh Updates with Professor Asturian. While our focus in the last month has been Artsakh, at Zoravik, we care about injustice everywhere and have hosted panels on Black Lives Matter, as well as voter suppression in the United States. It is in the spirit of progressive action that we organized today's discussion on Artsakh, titled On Ceasefires, International Inaction in the Nagorno-Karabakh War. This event is currently being live streamed at facebook.com/Zoravik and will be recorded and posted on the Zoravik Facebook and YouTube pages for future viewing. So today's event will go as follows. Our three panelists will present 8 to 10 minute remarks, followed by a Q&A style discussion. In the interest of time, most of our questions have been predetermined. We'll start with our first speaker tonight. Well, today, depending on where you are, it might be tonight. So our first speaker today is going to be David L. Phillips. Mr. Phillips is currently director of the program on peace building and rights and human rights at Columbia University's Institute for the Study of Human Rights. He has worked as a senior advisor to the United Nations Secretariat and as a foreign affairs expert and senior advisor to the US Department of State. He's also the author of numerous books, including The Great Betrayal, How America Abandoned the Kurds and Lost the Middle East, An Uncertain Ally, Turkey under Erdogan's Dictatorship, Losing Iraq, Inside the Post-War Reconstruction Fiasco, and Unsilencing the Past, Track to Diplomacy and Turkish-Armenian Reconciliation. He has published on Artsakh in the Boston Globe and National Interest. He is the co-author, along with me, of The Media War by Azerbaijan and Turkey against Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Later this week, he will be facilitating a discussion on Kosovo with former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. Suffice it to say, we are very honored to have you here, David, to speak with us.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. It's good to be on the panel today. Good to be joined by your audience. I was reflecting on the nature of diplomacy when I was preparing remarks for the discussion. And I had the great honor of working with Ambassador Richard Holbrooke. And I want to quote something he said, which I think is very telling to practitioners of diplomacy, also to students of diplomacy. Foreign policy is not architecture. In architecture, you make a plan down to the last nut, the last bolt, the last stress beam, and then you build the thing. Foreign policy, in my view, is more like jazz. It's an improvisation on a theme, and you change as you go along. So given this need for adaptability and flexibility, we do start our diplomatic endeavors with a linear approach. And we recognize that creating peace from conditions of violent conflict does require a strategy and a system for moving from war to a more stable and secure and peaceful situation. In the first phase of this linear approach, you have peacemaking. which usually involves negotiations, could involve mediation, could also involve direct contact between the parties in conflict. In the second phase, we have peace enforcement. And peace enforcement typically requires involvement by the international community under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which authorizes all necessary measures. We can enforce peace through peacekeeping operations. And in the third phase, we typically have peace building, which is something that I'm working on at Columbia. In fact, I've worked on all three phases in different capacities over the years. But peace building involves reconciliation. It's usually affirmed through humanitarian access or development and reconstruction assistance. When you look at the linear approach, moving from violent conflict to conditions of peace and stability, you have to recognize that these sequences are important. One phase leads to another. Each phase requires a different involvement by the parties in dispute and by the international community. What's been clear to me since September 27th is there's lots of attention being paid to Nagorno-Karabakh. But the antagonists in Nagorno-Karabakh, and in particular, Azerbaijan and Turkey, are not seeking a peaceful solution. They are looking to create conditions on the ground which would then be affirmed through an agreement. The eruption of violence on September 27th didn't come out of the blue sky. There had been joint military maneuvers between Azerbaijan and Turkey the previous month. There was offensive military equipment left behind by Turkey. There clearly was a premeditated intention to launch armed conflict. And the international community responded to that with great alacrity, but with little effect. On the 1st of October, there was a joint statement issued by President Trump, President Macron, and President Putin, in which they all called on the sides to cease hostilities and immediately move towards substantive negotiations. These three heads of state represent the three countries leading the OSCE Minsk group. The statement was strong, but it was completely ignored by Azerbaijan and Turkey. In fact, it was dissed by Turkey, who dismissed the appeal pretty much out of hand. Likewise, Turkey and Azerbaijan dismissed a follow-up appeal on the 5th of October that was issued by the foreign ministers of the three countries in the Minsk group. And during these weeks in October, we've seen ongoing efforts by the Minsk group and the international community to mediate an end to the conflict. On the 10th of October, the Moscow joint statement was issued. It called on the implementation of an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, monitoring of the ceasefire, and initiating discussions on the core substantive elements, looking towards a comprehensive solution. A week later, on the 18th, these themes were reiterated at a meeting in Paris convened by President Macron, also calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. The choice of those words is important. Humanitarian ceasefire is not permanent, it's temporary, it's a stopgap measure. I think that the mediators felt that was all they could get, and even then, what they hoped to get, they were not able to achieve. We saw over the weekend that the co-chairs of the OSCE Minsk group met in Washington with the foreign ministers from Armenia and Azerbaijan. The meeting was managed by Steve Begen, who is the Deputy Secretary of State, and they came up with an appeal pretty familiar and similar to what was already mentioned in previous Minsk group sessions. The co-chairs urged the sides to take immediate steps to implement all aspects of the October 10th Moscow joint statement, which had been reaffirmed in Paris on the 18th. They also agreed to meet again on October 29, probably because I didn't have very high hopes that those steps would be taken by the parties, and also a recognition that a humanitarian ceasefire needs to be part of a process that also addresses more substantive issues over a longer period of time. In rather shocking display of favoritism to Turkey and Azerbaijan, the U.S. ambassador to the OSCE, Daniel Baer, praised Turkey's role as a Minsk Group member, even though Turkey had played an insidious role undermining previous statements by the Minsk Group co-chairs. According to Ambassador Baer, we note recent statements that have called into question Turkey's constructiveness as a Minsk Group member, and we disagree with that assessment. Turkey has been a valuable member of the Minsk Group and has worked cooperatively with the co-chairs on finding a way forward in peace talks. Well, Ambassador Baer should be on the ground. He should be talking to the victims of aggression by Turkey and Azerbaijan. He might draw a different opinion. I'm frankly, though, not surprised that a U.S. official would take this position, because President Trump himself lacks objectivity when it comes to all matters concerning Turkey. MSNBC released a report just a few days ago itemizing the Trump organization's financial ties with Turkey. There are 119 companies where the Trump organization has a position. Turkish concerns have paid more than $10 million in licensing fees for use of the Trump name, particularly for the Trump Towers in Istanbul. And the Trump organization was also paid millions of dollars by an oligarch in Azerbaijan. So there are deep financial interests that bind President Trump to Turkey and Azerbaijan. We know that the Trump organization has a debt of $421 million. We don't know to whom that money is owed, but I would like to know if it's owed to Turkish concerns. We also don't know what promises have been made for the future. Shortly, that debt is going to come due. Where's the money going to come from? Who will Trump turn to raise the money? Does he count Erdogan and Aliyev as potential financial sponsors? And how does that affect American diplomacy? Is Trump acting in the U.S. national interest when it comes to the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, or is he acting in his own personal interest? According to ANCA Chairman Ken Hakichian, this administration's shameful legacy of endlessly caving in to Turkish threats at the expense of our own values and interests as a nation is truly a national disgrace, an embarrassment beneath the dignity of the American people, and let me add, an embarrassment and a betrayal of the Armenian people and Armenian Americans who are good citizens and are deeply concerned about the genocide that's going on in Nagorno-Karabakh. A genocide that's going on with active participation by Turkey. We've seen photographs of F-16s, F-16s on the ground. We know they've been used in the field of battle. We've seen drones supporting jihadis that have been brought to the battlefield by Turkey. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, there are now more than several thousand jihadists that have gone from Syria and also from Libya to Nagorno-Karabakh. They're being supported with state-of-the-art technology. They're being coordinated by Turkey, and they're working hand in glove with Azerbaijan. When we look at the dynamics within the Minsk Group, we should recognize the fact that Turkey and Russia have crossed swords in northwestern Syria, but Turkey seems to be bending over backwards not to antagonize Russia. Russia's OSCE ambassador Lukashevich was quoted attempts to defend one of the parties to the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh are absolutely destructive and cannot have any continuation. That was essentially a warning by Russia to Turkey. Turkey is also not going to confront President Trump or the United States, since we're all NATO members together. Although, as I often say, if Turkey applied for membership today, it wouldn't even be considered because it's Islamist, anti-American, and hostile to human rights. So Turkey's found that France and President Macron is a ripe and easy target. Recently, we saw a statement from Macron in which he talked about Islam in crisis, and he proposed stricter oversight of schooling and better control of foreign funding of mosques in France. This is in the wake of the execution of the French teacher by an Islamist who was enraged that the French teacher had discussed and shown photos of cartoons that riled a Muslim audience. An Élysée official noted the absence of messages of condolence and support from the Turkish president after the beheading of Samuel Paty, the teacher, also was deeply injurious to the French people. Turkey has taken aim at France, and as a result, there is a diplomatic tiff and economic disputes underway between Turkey and France. France said it would recall its envoy to Turkey for consultations following what was referred to as unacceptable statements by Tayyip Erdogan. Tayyip Erdogan said that Emmanuel Macron needed mental help because of statements that he had made about Islam and the Muslim world. Erdogan's communications chief, Feratin Altun, also said that the attitudes towards Muslims in France was, quote, eerily familiar and resembled the demonization of European Jews in the 1920s. For a Turkish official to be talking about the treatment of Jews in France and elsewhere, to me, is deeply ironic, and it's morally inconsistent with the truth. This war of words between Erdogan and France extends to other areas as well. France will present a bill in December to strengthen a 1905 law that officially separates church and state in France. Erdogan is suing Le Point, a French magazine, which alleged his collusion with the extermination of Syrian Kurds in Rojava. The state of Qatar, which is a loyal ally of Turkey, postponed a French Cultural Week that was scheduled to happen over these days, and two major distribution chains that sell French products have decided to suspend that sale, including, they've noted, the sale of French confiture, which is much liked by a Turkish market. In Kuwait, the parliament denounced Macron, and travel agencies have suspended trips to France. Morocco's foreign ministry said the publication of the cartoons of Mohammed was, quote, an act of provocation. And Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan also criticized Macron. All of this at the instigation of Turkey, as Erdogan plays out a personal rivalry and vendetta with the French president. So we need to see Turkey for what it is, not how it used to be or how we wish it were. Turkish troops right now are involved in frontline battlefields in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, and Somalia. Turkish warships are confronting Greek, Cypriot, and Israeli ships in the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey has used jihadists and Islamist extremists as its foot soldiers and the point of the spear in these countries, and now also in Nagorno-Karabakh. One of the things that I learned by working with Ambassador Holbrooke is that diplomacy is not just about the spoken word, it's about a credible threat of force in order to back up those diplomatic messages. Of course, sustainable peace must address all grievances and include reconstruction and humanitarian components. It must address the needs of all persons that are involved in an armed conflict and all civilians who are adversely affected. But we need to end this cycle of violence and work towards reconciliation. And for this to happen, we must start to recognize that Nagorno-Karabakh should be able to exercise its right to self-determination, that autonomy within Azerbaijan is not a viable alternative. And just as Milosevic lost his right to govern Kosovo because of his egregious human rights abuses, Aliyev is losing his right in Nagorno-Karabakh through the genocide which is underway, with Turkey's assistance and inspired by Erdogan himself. So we are at a crossroads. The international community needs to do more with its mediation. We as civil society need to remain informed of what's going on and to do everything we can to raise awareness and to encourage principled action by the US government. This may not be possible given Trump's beholden qualities to Turkey, but we still must raise our voices. We must bear witness. This is going to be going on for a while, and we need to do everything possible before November 3 and thereafter to make sure that the American people are on the right side of history. So thank you very much. I'll punt the panel back to you, Lisa.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that clear analysis of why we have been so inactive here in the United States. As you mentioned, a few of those possible conflicts of interest on the Trump administration. But as you mentioned, maybe there are potential for action here for Artsakh to possibly claim independence. We'll talk about that later in the program. But our next speaker, thank you again, David. So our next speaker is Dr. Laurence Broers, who is the Caucasus Program Director at London-based peacebuilding organization, Conciliation Resources. He has more than 20 years of experience as a researcher of conflicts in the South Caucasus and is a practitioner of peacebuilding initiatives in the region. He is also an associate fellow at Chatham House in their Russia and Eurasia program. Dr. Broers is the co-founder and co-editor-in-chief of Caucasus Survey, the first dedicated scholarly journal for the Caucasus region. He is also the author of 2019's Armenia and Azerbaijan, Anatomy of a Rivalry, and co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of the Caucasus and Armenia's Velvet Revolution, Authoritarian Decline and Civil Resistance in a Multipolar World, both volumes published this year. Thank you for joining us today, Laurence.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to join this panel. International inaction or passivity is one of the dominant narratives about this crisis. And this has been vividly illustrated online with the popularity of Martin Luther King's famous quote about the silence of our friends, which is something that I've seen actually on both sides. And to understand this inaction, I think we have to break it down into three components: distraction, inaction, and ineffectiveness. So distraction, I think, is fairly obvious. The timing of this conflict has coincided with a period of maximal distraction, with a host of pressing international concerns, from containing the COVID-19 second wave to the fate of American democracy on the 3rd of November, to the fate of Belarusian authoritarianism, and so on. So the bandwidth of attention for a crisis in the South Caucasus, which was never high, has been even narrower than usual, and not only among Euro-Atlantic actors. The second component I would frame as inaction, as per the title of this event. We're now 4 weeks into a major international conflict, and we haven't seen much of a concerted multilateral effort to engage with this crisis. The various statements and initiatives of the Minsk Group co-chairs notwithstanding. There have been numerous statements of concern, but the prevailing sense is of a vacuum. And there's a lot of different explanations for that, and I'm sure that we'll cover others in the Q&A, but I'm just going to highlight three for now. The first of these is a wide-ranging decline in the capacity of multilateral diplomacy to respond to and resolve conflict. This is part of a much longer-term trend in the decline of multilateralism over the last 10, 15 years. To act decisively. We haven't seen unity in the United Nations Security Council on a range of different conflicts. And linked to that is a hollowing out from within of multilateral institutions. The Council of Europe is an example. The OSCE, unfortunately, is another, whether we're talking about the closing down of its field offices in Armenia and Azerbaijan, or the current leadership crisis in the organization. That kind of long-term decline is linked in the context of this conflict to an absolutely obsolete mandate of the Minsk Group. The Minsk Group is often criticized for being toothless, but the reality is that it has a toothless mandate from an earlier era, which has not been fit for purpose for many years. Even when the parties have agreed, however, as they did after the April 2016 four-day war in May of that year in Vienna, to strengthen that mandate, their commitments have not been fulfilled. Add to this the evolving modus operandi of the Minsk Group, which since around about 2006 has seen a kind of tacit default by the US and France to Russian leadership. That's been evident across a number of different parameters. The lack of American or French underwriting of specific initiatives, the significantly longer terms served by Russian co-chairs as compared to their American and French counterparts, to the Kremlin's establishment of a separate trilateral format running in parallel to the Minsk Group. Now, I think it's fair to say that this conflict is unique amongst those in Eurasia, in that Russia's interests do coincide with the US and France on preventing a large-scale war. And this convergence, in a sense, has justified Euro-Atlantic default to informal Russian leadership. But that's as far as the consensus goes. Russia is much less of a partner when it comes to going beyond conflict or war mitigation to actual peace building as per David's schema. And so I think this is one key pillar in this complex of inaction. Another one is what I would call the normative ambiguity of this conflict, which is multifaceted. For those international actors that claim to care about norms and values, this conflict doesn't have a lot of the putative clarity of those in Georgia, in Ukraine, where support for territorial integrity has gone hand in hand with support for democratic transition. The claims of the parties are themselves ambiguous. Nagorno-Karabakh's self-determination claim has been diluted and undermined by the occupation of the surrounding districts over all of these years since the early 90s, and the injustice of the mass displacement of ethnic Azerbaijanis from those territories. Azerbaijan's territorial integrity claim has also been undermined by the lack of a clear offer or plausible scenario whereby Armenians could be secure and self-governing within a territorially whole and multi-ethnic Azerbaijan. And that sense of normative ambiguity is reinforced by the lack of any membership prospect or ambition for either party within Euro-Atlantic regional blocs and organizations. So there's no leverage that can be applied to ensure compliance with values relating to a coveted membership of such organizations, and that which would give outside actors a clear repertoire of possible actions to follow in a crisis such as this. The third pillar that I want to focus on is the more specific question of what is needed to resume negotiations, what the preconditions are for a ceasefire, and whether these preconditions can be said to exist. A ceasefire might proceed or hope or aspire to be successful through one of three routes: the achievement of military goals, conflict fatigue on the part of the parties, or sufficient external leverage. And none of these conditions appears to apply. Now, while the goals of a humanitarian ceasefire, which, as David highlighted, is a temporary measure, not intended to be permanent, a more permanent ceasefire needs to provide a route to a political process and to the resumption of talks. And that's quite complicated in the situation that we're facing today in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. This is firstly because any new ceasefire has to address a wholly new context on the ground, with a new line of separation between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces that's going to require a very difficult process of definition and a new international security architecture to make it viable. Now, for that architecture to come into being, you need an international willingness to contribute to that. That willingness, however, is mired and obstructed by the lack of perspective on a political process that could resolve the conflict and put a clear timeline on any peacekeeping deployment. No outside power wants to contribute peacekeepers indefinitely, and so what's needed is a kind of a clear horizon that could plausibly make peacekeeping redundant and make it clear to outside actors that they're not simply contributing something which will go on forever in an indefinite peacekeeping context, such as the one we see in Cyprus. Now, the visions that have been put forward by the parties in recent statements make it clear that no such process can at present be imagined. It's not at all clear whether the basic principles, the proposal that's been negotiated since the mid-2000s is still on the table and is still relevant. The Minsk group statements have underlined that forward movement must be framed in terms of the basic principles, but some of these principles, at least in part, such as withdrawals from occupied territories around Nagorno-Karabakh, have been partly implemented by force over the last few days. Others, such as a referendum or plebiscite in Nagorno-Karabakh, have been ruled out by the Azerbaijani leadership. And it's hard to imagine that an interim status, an ill-defined interim status, would offer sufficient security guarantees to Karabakh Armenians for them to be able to agree to that. And so what I want to underline is that establishing a clear vision of ceasefire day +1 matters because outside actors risk political and diplomatic capital in brokering ceasefires, and when they don't hold, they look ineffective. And that brings me to the third pillar that I want to briefly discuss, and that is ineffectiveness. Namely that those actions that have been undertaken have proven to be ineffective. We've seen that in the 3 ceasefires, each with a different Minsk group co-chair in the lead. Now, that French-led or US-led ceasefires haven't held is not perhaps particularly surprising, as neither co-chair has a history of leading sustainable ceasefires in this context. But Russia does, and the Kremlin has perhaps expended more effort than any other actor to stop the fighting this time around, including the 10-hour marathon negotiation that led to the first 10th of October ceasefire. Now, there are various reasons for Russia's ineffectiveness, and I'll just highlight 3. First is a decline in Russian leverage compared to 2016. It's no longer in control of the security system that kept an imperfect peace in this conflict for the last 15 years or so. Moscow had a monopoly over that system in many ways, a monopoly which was assented to, which was agreed to effectively by France and the United States and other Euro-Atlantic actors. And that monopoly has now been broken by Turkey's more explicit entry into the conflict. And that has given Azerbaijan the confidence to reject what it sees as self-seeking, self-serving Russian brokerage in this conflict. A second reason for Russian ineffectiveness is that Russia's toolkit is actually tactically quite limited in the theater of conflict itself. There are the issues of access. There are the issues that security guarantees only apply to the territory of Armenia, not to Nagorno-Karabakh itself. And unlike in Georgia and Ukraine, Russia has interests that it really wants to preserve with Azerbaijan. And if it acts decisively to defend Armenian interests, it risks losing Azerbaijan and potentially reducing its putative sphere of influence in the South Caucasus to Armenia, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia. And so I think what we're seeing is that this strategic ambiguity that Russia has cultivated for all these years has actually obscured steep declines in Russian influence and capacity. And the third factor that I would highlight is that Russian primacy in the kinds of action or the kinds of policy that could de-escalate is not actually wanted by the parties. A Russian-dominated peacekeeping operation, for example, is wanted by neither side and is not something that Russia could actually do on its own. It needs to act like a multilateral actor in order to achieve that. So what we see is a Russian ineffectiveness as a result of a declining capacity, weakness of its current toolkit, and ultimately Russia's limitations as a unilateral actor. So I'll sum up. International inaction needs to be broken down into distraction, inaction, and ineffectiveness. The causes are both long and short term, driven by global declines in multilateral diplomacy, ambiguities embedded within this conflict and the process to mediate it, and the specific problems of how a ceasefire could, under new conditions on the ground, actually take hold. And what we're left with is a vacuum at the global level, at the regional level, and in the mediation space. And that vacuum is being filled with the military dynamic of what is happening on the battlefield. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Laurence. Thank you for splitting up what we just termed inaction, just in a general way. Thank you for splitting it up into those three parts for distraction, inaction, and ineffectiveness, and explaining it so clearly for us. So we're going to thank you again, Laurence, for your work. We are going to go on to our last speaker for today. And our last speaker today is someone that might be familiar to those of you who are friends of Zoravik. It is Dr. Stephan Asturian. As always, we are honored to have Dr. Asturian join us today. He is the William Saroyan Director of the Armenian Studies Program at the University of California, Berkeley. He is also an associate adjunct professor in Armenian and Caucasian history in its Department of History. Dr. Asturian is the co-editor with Dr. Raymond Kevorkian of Collective and State Violence in Turkey, The Construction of a National Identity from Empire to Nation State, out this month with Berghahn Books. And he is the author of a forthcoming volume entitled At the Crossroads of the Armenian-Azerbaijani Conflict, History, Territory, Nationalisms, out next year. He has published extensively on the origins and historiography of the Armenian genocide and on modern Caucasian history, including post-Soviet Caucasian politics. Last Thursday, October 22nd, he shared his expertise on the region as a guest on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. Thank you for joining us today, Stephan. One second, Stephan, you're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, David and Laurence. It's nice to meet you for the first time, even though it's online. It's a pleasure. I am glad that my very short presentation will not duplicate the previous ones, because I will focus on the current situation on the front lines and what conclusions, tentative conclusions, can be drawn from the current situation. I am also glad that 2 days ago, the spokesperson for the Armenian army presented a quite realistic picture of where things stand. And thus, I don't think I am disclosing anything that is top secret or something like that. Okay, so what's going on? Azerbaijan has essentially advanced in the south along the Artsakh river and is now trying to go a little bit north in the southwestern region in the direction of Lachin. To the north, a very small piece of territory was lost by the Nagorno-Karabakh troops. So most of the Azerbaijani gains are in the south. The south overall can be characterized as flatlands. And that explains partly why the Azerbaijani advance was more successful there. It is estimated by military specialists that about somewhere around 12–13% of the territory controlled by the mountainous Karabakh troops has been conquered by Azerbaijan over the past weeks. Now, the Azerbaijani advance is obviously very significant, and I will delve into it, a little bit more later on. However, I suspect that when the war started, the Azerbaijani-Turkish expectation was that it would most likely be a blitzkrieg, at least in the south, in the non-mountainous area. And in that regard, in exactly 1 month of conflict today, this is the 30th day, I believe, the achievements of the Azerbaijani army are significant, but, the Armenian troops have not yet lost the war. Right now, the attack is directed at Lachin, which is a very strategic place. It's a corridor, the main corridor linking Armenia with mountainous Karabakh. It is also called in Armenian Berdzor, and it is the target. I have just heard that there is heavy shelling on that corridor. So the strategic target is quite clear at this point. I personally believe that this week is quite crucial because there are two interpretations of the Azerbaijani advance in the south. And both might be complementary, actually. I don't think it's an either or situation. The first explanation is that Armenian troops were overwhelmed, especially with the drones and so on, and just had to retreat. That might have been the case, I think, maybe in the first week or so, or a little bit more. The second interpretation is that, the military leadership of those troops, instead of incurring vast losses, has just decided to tactically withdraw to more hilly forested terrain where it will be easier to fight, and also to wait for the winter, which should probably set in over the next 10 days or 2 weeks. I believe these two interpretations are most likely complementary. That is, after a moment of massive surprise with those, dozens of drones, attacking the Armenian troops, I believe also there was a tactical decision. So the proof being in the pudding, I think if we see this week that Azerbaijani troops are really advancing further toward Lachin or taking Lachin or something like that, then that's pretty bad news for the mountainous Karabakh troops. That would in part undermine the argument in favor of the tactical withdrawal thesis. Second point, what is Aliyev's goal? Well, when you read the Azerbaijani press online, and I am not just talking about the few media sources in English, there are newspapers in Azerbaijani and so on. He made it clear, President Aliyev, that he wants a total victory. He even mentioned that he wouldn't be satisfied until Shusha or Shushi in Armenian is captured. I believe Turkey shares totally the same goal. And when you read the Azerbaijani press and so on, you notice that the impression prevails that it's total victory. And we have other reports that euphoria also prevails in Azerbaijani public opinion. Now, all that is fine, but what does it mean insofar as the war is concerned? Any kind of ceasefire or end to the war with very limited success, which doesn't reflect the goals set by President Aliyev of total victory, Shusha will be seized, will be a deep embarrassment, of course, for the Azerbaijani regime. So I think there is a situation where both for Mr. President Erdogan and Aliyev, they have to keep going, and we shall see if they will succeed. I don't see any incentive they might have to even stop the war and say, okay, now we are going to negotiate on the basis of the present existing line of demarcation. We have now captured a number of provinces to the south and so on. That will be, I believe, a little bit difficult. Now, to the south and the southwest in the direction of Lachin, the war has moved to a more, I wouldn't say mountainous, but certainly hilly and forested terrain where the Armenian forces are located. Third point, over the past week, we know that there are about 600 military personnel of various kinds, Turkish military personnel in Azerbaijan, coordinating the war effort, the drones, F-16s, and so on. All that is quite clear, but we notice also a further deepening of Turkish involvement over the past week. They are now sending a special force regiment specialized in mountain warfare that was fighting in mountainous Kurdistan. Just today, Bayraktar drone was located near the border of Armenia in the area of Doğu Bayazit on the Turkish side. So now they are acting also on the Turkish side of the border, apparently. And there remains to be seen whether Turkey and Azerbaijan at some point will activate the Nakhichevan front line. For example, to organize a real or diversionary attack in the direction of Mehri, the linkage between Armenia and Iran. That, I believe, would be very dangerous, would be probably one of the possible causes for the expansion of the conflict. Fourth point, now Iran is clearly preparing for complications. There were military exercises near the Artsakh River, just on the other side of the territory now conquered by the Azerbaijani troops, and a nice ground brigade of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been now positioned along the Artsakh River, the so-called Imam Zaman brigade. So Iran is preparing for some possible developments in the future, and I believe complications coming from Nakhichevan might be one of the possible scenarios for Iran to get involved. Fifth point I would like to make today, since I have been talking to Zoravik a number of times, it is quite clear that Armenia was not sufficiently ready to fight a war with massive number of drones. I am not a military specialist, but I think this might be the first war where there is massive involvement of drones, that is dozens and dozens. So it might be even interesting, this war, for military specialists. I cannot recall another case where such a number of drones has been used. So this might be an innovation. In addition to the fact that this is a very modern type of warfare, maybe even unprecedented in terms of the numbers of drones used, over the years I noticed some kind of hubris in the Armenian press, on Armenian websites. You know, if there is a war, we are going to reach Baku, at the very least the Kura River, and so on. It is clear to me also there was an attitude based on the previous successes against the Azerbaijanis, an attitude essentially of underestimation of the enemy, a sense of superiority. And this war, at least its beginning, you know, has, I believe, undermined to a certain extent that attitude. Sixth point, Russia seems to have sent new military material to Armenia, in particular a jamming system that appears to be quite efficient, called the Krasukha 4, and maybe also some type of anti-unmanned aerial vehicle missile. Some of those missiles were quite good at some point in Syria, in Libya less so. They have diverse types. Nothing seemed to be perfect against the Turkish drone Bayraktar. But the latest information is that a number of Bayraktars, they say 9, have been shot down over the past 2 days. If that is true, then there is a change in terms of technological imbalance. that occurred a few days ago. In conclusion, a few points. Nagorno-Karabakh cities, towns, and some villages have been substantially destroyed. Second point, like all wars, these wars should not be judged on the basis of the current situation on the front line. If you judge the German invasion of the Soviet Union in mid-November 1941, things looked very sunny, beautiful, and the Soviet Union was going to crumble down. Well, if you move, 8 months later, things were not that sunny, and 2 years later, it was a disaster for the Germans. So this is not, hubris on my part, but I have seen many titles in the French press in particular that things were totally falling apart for the Armenians and so on. I don't know if they are falling apart. All that I know is that you judge a war by its ending. In that sense, it is noticeable now with the arrival soon of the winter that Azerbaijani troops are now really stretched. They have a long logistical line to maintain. That's why I believe that if during this week or over the next 5-7 days, they are not getting closer to Lachin or capturing Lachin, then we might be moving into a phase of war of attrition or more stationary war or something combined with guerrilla warfare. The situation is likely to change over the next 2-3 weeks without any doubt. There is I cannot see a diplomatic solution at this point. There is no content to Azerbaijani claims of offering autonomy. President Aliyev has been on record over the past few days. Armenians and Azerbaijanis can live together in Georgia, in Russia, and so on. There is no problem. They can live together in Azerbaijan. What autonomy is Azerbaijan talking about? We don't know. I believe actually they canceled the autonomous status of Nagorno-Karabakh a long time ago. These claims of autonomy and so on are undermined by the atrocities that have taken place over the past few weeks. Basically, the behavior undermines the claim to autonomy. I don't think there is one person in the world outside the close allies of Azerbaijan who can seriously believe in that argument that Armenians will be safe, in some kind of an autonomous Nagorno-Karabakh within Azerbaijan. I actually think that the military situation is going to dictate what takes place next. Finally, the basic principles, I think Laurence alluded to them. Something is quite clear, at least to me, but who am I? I mean, I'm not a president of this or that country. More and more, in view of this war and its nature, which I believe is to a certain extent genocidal if Azerbaijan and Turkey succeed, the basic principles with the argument that you return these territories, then we open the borders and trade, then we discuss Kelbajar, which guaranteed should go to Azerbaijan, and then a status for Lachin, a corridor may be internationalized. And then once all of this is done, maybe a referendum at an undetermined moment in the future, and the assumption that Azerbaijan then will accept that referendum or let it happen once it has taken already all the territories. It seems to me now with this type of war, that would be a fool's arrangement. I'm sorry to say it, but that's, you know, I'm a realist, and if it were an individual problem, I wouldn't buy that solution. Personally, for another reason. I think it was again Laurence or maybe David, you know, keeping the surrounding territories to Karabakh and calling them liberated territories and so on. Of course, that also was a problem. But the main problem is that without those territories, right now the war would be fought literally within the borders of the former autonomous oblast of Nagorno-Karabakh, with even more devastation for that population. So it's a very complicated situation, and I am not optimistic at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Even though I know you said you're not optimistic at all, surprisingly, I have to say, I think every time when you speak and talk about the military situation, what's going on the ground, the current situation, I feel an odd sense of relief. I don't know where that's coming from, but it is striking for me. So we're actually now going to move into our last part of today's program. We're going to go into the Q&A. So I thank you all three speakers for sharing your expertise with us and sharing your insights on what's going on the ground, and also what's going on possibly diplomatically or in terms of inaction. Now we're going to move on to this Q&A session. And to our audience members, I just want to say that most of these questions are predetermined. We do have to stay on time, so we are intending to finish this event at 4:30. So we don't have very much time. So let's really, if you want more information, you can join us on Friday for our next Artsakh update with Professor Astourian, which will take place this Friday, October 30th at 3 p.m. Eastern. So let's begin with our first question. Genocide Watch affirmed this weekend there is a genocide emergency in Artsakh, stating that we're at stage 9, extermination, and stage 10, denial, while Human Rights Watch published clear documentation of human rights abuses with Azerbaijan's use of cluster bombs on the civilians of Artsakh. Can you put Azerbaijan's and Turkey's genocidal intentions into context, either historically, regionally, socially, however you'd like to comment on this? And can you comment on the role, comment on how their national identity politics have played a role in the escalation and continuation of this war? And I know a few of you have also answered this question in your talk, so no need to chime in again if you already feel like your talk addressed this. We have a few more questions after this.
Lisa, I'll try to answer part of that question. So it looks as though there's another Armenian genocide underway. The strategic objective here is to ethnically cleanse Nagorno-Karabakh of ethnic Armenians, to drive them off the territory, perhaps back to Armenia. If that were to occur, we need a better understanding of which forces are the perpetrators. So I'd like to learn a little bit more from Stephan about who is actually engaged. We heard about Turkish special forces. We know there are several thousand jihadists on the front line. There are Azerbaijan armed forces. Who's in charge? Who's responsible for what's going on? Is there a clear command and control? Maybe that's a question for Stephan.
My impression, which is based on various readings, but predominantly, I would say some Russian sources, is that this war was planned and is being led by Turkey, essentially. Now I cannot have independent corroboration of that, and I am a historian. I like archives, the distance toward the events and so on. I don't have that now, but I tend to believe what they are saying. Just yesterday, I think it's the vice chair of the Duma and so on clearly indicated that they transmitted all the information about jihadists to I believe it was I have to check whether it was the Azerbaijani army or the secret service, and he was surprised that President Aliyev seemed to be unaware of these data. Now, we don't know if he's unaware, if he's lying, and so on. But in general, this is, I consider this to be a Turkish war effort. And they have even claimed that if there is intervention, there are F-16s. Azerbaijan denied the presence of F-16s on the territory. Now, after denying it, argued over the past 12 hours that the F-16s will be used to counter any attack against Azerbaijan. The facts show that Turkey is literally fully involved, and the transfer of that special force regiment is even more indicative of the direction that Turkey is going to take. That is, I believe that they are even ready to support Azerbaijan with even more troops in the future if things go poorly. So that's my impression. Very hard to corroborate with independent, solid evidence.
We see that Turkey is projecting force in other theaters as well. Turkish troops on the front line in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya. So it'd be consistent with Erdogan's neo-Ottoman agenda, trying to reassert Turkish influence. Mm-hmm. So we need to keep that in mind. There is precedent. And when Erdogan says that there was no genocide, but there will be one, we need to take him at his word, because that is a serious threat, and the international community, and particularly the US, needs to react to that. So where is the US enforcement of Section 907? Why is there an imbalance in US military assistance between Azerbaijan and Armenia? Why haven't we imposed sanctions on Turkey, as required under the Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act for its purchase of Russian missiles? It looks as though in the Minsk group that the US is the weak link, whether it's diplomatically or otherwise. We're not doing our part to stop this slaughter.
David, thank you for highlighting exactly the subtitle of this talk today, of our panel today, Inaction, International Inaction. And as you mentioned, there needs to be action taken here. And there is a weak link here that we can point out, as you mentioned. And thank you, Stephan, for pointing out who might be behind all of this from your sources, from what you're seeing in the coverage in the Russian newspapers. Turkey is what is coming through as the actor here. So I'm going to go on to the next question, which is a little bit different, unless Laurence, you would like to chime in here about any of the things that have been discussed.
Sure. I'd like to put this issue perhaps in a slightly different context, and that is the established practice of ethnic cleansing between Armenians and Azerbaijanis that goes back to the First World War period, but was particularly prevalent during the 1990s conflict, that any military advance by either side was always associated with the carpet cleansing of the representatives of the other nationalities. So when we think of the Azerbaijani advance in summer 1992, when a large portion of the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, the former oblast, came under Azerbaijani control, it was ethnically cleansed. And when we think about the Armenian advances in mid-1992, and then between April and October 1993, there was again large-scale ethnic cleansing of ethnic Azerbaijanis. And so I think that fear is very present. I don't underestimate Armenian concerns that this may repeat itself. And I think this underlines the culture of impunity for ethnic cleansing and war crimes that came out of the 1990s conflict And this underlines the need for a real process, perhaps something along the lines of the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia that could follow this conflict. And so yeah, I am concerned that ethnic cleansing may take place, and it presents a kind of a fait accompli, a resolution of the conflict as such, but that is not a resolution of the conflict. It would be a military solution. It would create the basis for a new cycle of conflict decades hence, and basically re-embed the rivalry between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So yes, I hear the concerns, but I think it's this culture of impunity on both sides that actually needs to be also addressed.
I would like to reiterate just that the current situation, from what we're seeing with Genocide Watch specifically, it's the extermination of Armenians, ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh in Artsakh right now. And that's personally of my, when I hear that is deeply concerning, and it's something that we need to work against. I can hear what you're saying about previous in the history, in history in the 90s, there had been instances that were problematic. However, right now, I really do want to emphasize that the focus here is on the extermination of our ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. That is of utmost concern here. Okay, so let's go on to the next question. There have been a number of articles published recently about the media war being waged by Azerbaijan and Turkey alongside their media offensive. In addition to my and David's article, both Nanor Barsumyan's and Lucine Kasparian's articles have revealed that centers on university campuses, various think tanks, and public relations firms in the US have been funded by Azerbaijani and Turkish governments. So now I'd like to ask a very frank question of all three of you. Have you or anyone you know been approached by Azerbaijani or Turkish government lobbyists? Have you or anyone you know been approached by Azerbaijani and Turkish funded PR firms? And without asking for specifics, do you know anyone who has accepted money or currently works for an organization that has received money from Azerbaijan or Turkey? This was for all three of you, so go ahead.
So no, neither Turkey nor Azerbaijan has approached me and offered me great riches. They know better than to try to buy my loyalty. It wouldn't work and it would backfire. But I do know organizations and individuals who have been bought off. I'm thinking specifically about the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., which took more than $1 million from Turkish oligarchs, ostensibly for an energy conference, but that's in doubt. I think about one of its affiliates, Matt Bryza, who used to be a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, who's on the board of several large Turkish and Azeri companies, paying him large sums as board fees. He's not registered under FARA as a foreign agent. So we need to have a much closer scrutiny of organizations and individuals who are in Turkey's gravy train, because they do not have credibility to be advocating in Washington if they have been hired by regimes that are committing crimes against the Armenian people.
Thank you, David. Thank you for revealing some of those connections, some of that nefarious money that's going around. If either Stephan or Laurence, you'd like to comment on this question, we would appreciate hearing your answers.
Sure. Well, I've never been approached by PR firms for my perspective. I mean, I have an academic profile that is completely independent. I sought funding for my book on this conflict. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful, so I had to pay my own way. But that means that it was obviously completely independent. So there are some well-known figures. It's no secret. Brenda Schaffer has been an advisor on the SOCAR board. I have actually made use of Professor Schaffer's scholarship on the Iranian Azerbaijan issue. She wrote a book, Borders and Brethren, which I think had a lot of was a good work of scholarship. But in terms of what I call the lobby literature, I think one does have to take it with a big pinch of salt and question actually how effective it is. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you.
I'll keep it, I'll be short. I haven't been approached in that regard. I was invited to discuss a particular issue in a major think tank located near Washington. I said what I had to say in front of diplomats, national security people, Radio Free Europe, this and that. Then somebody who is a long-time Washington person, told me, Stephan, what you said was accurate, but you will never be invited again here. And he was absolutely right. The system works in a more subtle way, Lisa. It's not that somebody comes to you with an envelope, saying, here, Stephan, $5,000, we are buying you. You are offered incentives to become a reference, to become the guru. Let's say in this case of the Karabakh issue, you start appearing on CNN and so on. You become the voice of reason. You want to bring peace. You have in your DNA, you have a peace element. You want to bring peace and so on and so on and so forth. So it's not as crude, at least with academics, as your question suggested. But the interest of your question is to look precisely at, to use an old Marxist term that I used to listen to hear when I was young in France, there were the modes of production, the conditions of production, and so on and so forth. It would be very interesting to look at the conditions of production of news and pseudo-knowledge, in the West. And you would see that it's quite well organized, actually, and not just about this issue, other issues also. Yeah.
So the Congressional Research Service could be asked by a member of Congress to do a study identifying Turkish money's infiltration with think tanks and universities. And then that study becomes a matter of the public record. This influence peddling shouldn't be happening in the dark. We should shine a light on it. And there are mechanisms that are within reach to do so.
Fully agree. And I agree that, Stephan, my question was quite crude on purpose, because I just wanted to hear your thoughts about where the money is coming from that you're seeing in these more subtle ways, in terms of where things are getting published, or how certain incentives are offered to scholars and non-scholars of this region and elsewhere as well, like you mentioned, Stephan. But David, I think, getting this as a research project for the public to see, I think, is a very important aspect of us being citizens and asking for something that we should know. Okay, let's go on to our last question for the day. And there are many questions that we had, but this is our last one, unfortunately, for the purposes of time. So on October 8th, Facebook deleted 589 Facebook accounts, 7,906 pages, and 447 Instagram accounts that were engaged in inauthentic behavior to clean up Azerbaijan's image online. We also know of certain op-eds and other things that have been written expressly to clean up Azerbaijan's image in terms of them not being the aggressors of this war. What are the main ways that you have seen the facts of this war distorted online? And have you yourself encountered any of the online harassment or intimidation that a number of us have as we are telling people about this war?
I haven't been harassed yet, even though after the Democracy Now! Interview around 5:30 a.m., I have seen lots of comments about the so-called professor. He should be in jail and so on. I know there are people who had concerns in view of the hate crimes in the San Francisco area. Azerbaijani graffitis on the Armenian school, a church building where you have offices, the community center, library, arson, totally gutted. Then shooting at that school and so on. Some people were concerned. I know a young woman, she just replied to my email in Armenia. She's the daughter of a good friend and she works in Armenia now. She posted something at the beginning of the conflict. She's not a specialist at all, and she was really harassed and distraught and so on. So that type of things is happening, but I cannot say that I am suffering deeply right now, you know? Yeah.
Lisa, when we had our conference the other day with the Armenian ambassador and Van Krikorian, during the conference, we received more than 100 questions from Azeris in the audience. And those questions I would characterize as confrontational and aggressive. So there is a systematic and organized effort underway to harass academics and scholars, to change their opinion or to intimidate them. We've experienced that directly.
For my part, I would say that during times of extreme polarization, it's perhaps expected that people will denigrate those who don't agree with them completely. I don't know whether I would qualify it as harassment, but I've certainly had a lot of comments, doubting my moral integrity or my scientific credentials and so on. And one's caught in a trap. If you highlight something on one side, you're accused of being biased. And if you talk about both sides, it's both sidism, and so you can't win. So I'm used to this. My book was not very well received in some quarters in Armenia. But other work that I've been involved with through Conciliation Resources has not been very well received in Azerbaijan. And that's just the cycle that we have to go through. And it's crucial to maintain one's independence and integrity.
On that note, I actually do want to affirm that all three of you work in such different ways in order to express and make sure the truth is out there about this war. So all three of you in different ways are talking about facts of this war. All three of you are saying things that are not that do not want to be heard by different actors. Specifically even Azerbaijan or Turkey or people, individuals in those countries. However, I want to affirm that all three of you, we appreciate the work that you are doing to make sure facts are being shared about this war. And I appreciate all three of you coming here tonight or today and sharing your work with us. Now, it's time for us to end the program, and I really do appreciate all three of you sharing your work with us. Before we go, I'd like to especially thank my co-organizer, Laurence. In addition, I would like to thank the AGBU Young Professionals Boston chapter and to those who spread the word on social media about this event today. And of course, again, I want to thank our speakers for generously sharing your insights and knowledge with us and with the world, making sure that facts are being shared. A recording of this panel will be posted on the Zoravik Facebook page and on the Zoravik YouTube channel. If you're hungry for more, there is a dog who seems hungry. Join us this Friday for our next Artsakh update. To our US-based viewers, go out and vote if you have not already. This is very important. We can change lots of things by making sure that our voice is heard through our vote. And to all of our viewers, depending on where you are, we wish you a good rest of the day, evening, or night. Thank you.